Welcome to Think Big for Africa podcast. On this podcast, we will bring you interesting conversations with local, national, and international African leaders from all walks of life, home and abroad. Leaders who are doing their bits to progress Africa's development. Conversation topics will range from education, science, health, leadership, politics, business, and many other global issues. Conversations about everything that concerns Africa's development. Africa has so many wonderful achievers worldwide, and this is exactly what we will bring to you on Think Big for Africa podcast. Stay tuned.
Hello, this is Think Big for Africa podcast. My name is Ekene Banye, your host. Today, I have a colleague, a coach who is based in Accra, Ghana. He's doing a lot of work with fellow Africans, and I really want to talk to him about coaching in Africa. Her name is Akua. Let me get this right. Akua Nyame-Mensah. Yes, I got it. Akua, how are you?
I'm doing well, and I'm super excited to be here. And yeah, just really honored that you reached out, and I'm excited to have this conversation with a fellow coach.
Good. You know what? Let's start, even though we have started pre the podcast. I've told you some things about me, but I want you to tell me and my audience a little bit about you and your work.
Yeah. And I think the question always with this one is like, where do I start? Like, do I start at the beginning when I started coaching?
You can start with your teenage years and school and that. Yeah, do that.
That sounds good.
Good.
So I actually grew up in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, and I was part of a group of people, I guess, that were actually evacuated. So I've actually been, for the most part, an immigrant for a lot of my life. I've lived in places I'm not necessarily from. So I grew up in Francophone West Africa. I did go to American schools, and I'm also half American, but grew up primarily in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, spent about 6 months in Ghana. And that was the longest time I'd ever spent in Ghana. So I'm half Ghanaian, for those of you who don't know. And then after that, it was decided, or my parents decided, that we would move up to Tunis, Tunisia, because the organization that my father worked for had moved to Tunis. And so we went, and it's a really, I think for me, such an interesting experience to have graduated from an American school or an international school in Tunis, because I actually graduated with the same people that I started pre-K with.
Wow.
Well, a lot of my classmates, we went all through elementary, middle, and high school together. And a bunch of us graduated actually together in Tunis, Tunisia, because all of us, or a bunch of us, our parents, or one of our parents, worked for the same organization. So I've had a very, very diverse, very multicultural, very eclectic upbringing, beyond the fact that my parents come from 2 different continents and also had 2 very different upbringings as well. Okay. And I think for me, I've always been really excited about having the opportunity to engage with people, and, anyone I meet. It doesn't matter how old you are, how young you are, where you're from, even potentially what language you speak. I think I can always find common ground and always find something interesting in that person. And I think that person can also find something interesting in me. So I think one of the things that really drives the work I do is the fact that I love being able to work with people all around the world, which is why I do have a virtual business, even though I have decided to sit and live on the African continent. I really do love being able to work with people all around the world and take different ideas, different perspective, different lenses, in my work. I think, my approach to coaching definitely involves lots of different systems. And I love using systems from what would be expected within the corporate sense all the way to the esoteric, where people are like, that's a bit weird, but I need to be pushed outside my comfort zone. So I'm willing and ready to do that. And I definitely think my upbringing sort of gave me that comfort, that confidence to do that, because I definitely would say my education was quite eclectic as well.
What did you study in school? And yeah, just tell us about that and your career from the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, so I graduated. So as I mentioned before, I went to an international school, but graduated with an American diploma and also did the IB, so International Baccalaureate. So once again, that's a very interdisciplinary approach to education, and the American system also is quite interdisciplinary, where you're not just necessarily, writing and memorizing, but you very much have to know how to use that information and use it, I think, in very interesting ways. Yeah. So sort of continuing with that tradition, I decided to go to a liberal arts school in the US. So my bachelor's degree is from Bryn Mawr College, which is an all women's college in the Philadelphia, so right outside of Philadelphia area. And while I was there, honestly, I spent most of my time playing sports. So I love playing sports. I grew up playing sports my entire life. And so while there, it is only a Division III school. So, in terms of thinking about like how hard the sports were, it wasn't necessarily the highest level, but we got to play almost every single day. And I loved that. And that's also sort of how I live my life, and sort of in terms of the type of coaching that I provide, I very much try and give my clients an opportunity to think about what energizes them. What are some of the outlets they need in order for them to be able to show up and be successful with the work that they're doing or the business that they're building. And so while at Bryn Mawr, I actually did a degree in growth and structures of cities. And I also had a minor in economics. So my, growing up, because of where my father worked and also because of my mom as well. So my mom was in education. She was actually my high school principal. My father was a transportation economist who actually has a PhD. So education is very important in my family. And I would say all of us, and I have two other siblings, we're all overeducated. It's ridiculous, like across the board. But what that simply just means is that education, having these types of conversations and talking about development was something that we always talked about in my family and still talk about, these days as well. So I definitely thought that my way to help support what I saw as the way forward on the continent was through physical development. And so I thought that a degree in growth and structures of cities, and then after that, I also did a master's in city planning at University of Pennsylvania. I thought that it was really through physical planning, physical thinking about how we'd use the space where we would get to the next level. And so for me, a lot of my, I think early ideas or interests in terms of what I thought I would be, I very much thought I would be involved in building cities, physical infrastructure, but a little bit more on the soft side. So city planners are once again very interdisciplinary. We are not engineers, we are not architects, but we work with engineers, we work with architects, we work with a lot of data, information, census, and we're the ones who help put together the short, medium, and long-term plans to allow cities to thrive. And though I am not a planner, I do like to think that a lot of the work that I did for both my undergraduate and my first master's is very relevant to the work that I do, at least with people. So it's a very different thing. So as opposed to thinking about physical spaces, I'm working more with people's emotions, people's motivation, which I think is still really interesting. And we are thinking about it from that perspective of, short, medium, and long term, to sort of bring it back, I guess, to what I'm doing now. And then after doing my first master's, I couldn't find a job. I graduated at a time in the US where it was very difficult to find an opportunity. So it was around the recession or towards the end of the recession, I guess. And so I decided after getting my master's that I would do sort of a volunteer program. And so in the US, they have this program that's called AmeriCorps, where you sort of take on an opportunity that's very much needed in a community, but they really don't pay you. They pay you very little. They pay you so little that you're just right below the poverty line, so you can be on food stamps. So I spent a year on the West Coast of the US, working for what they call a conservation district, which is a very interesting quasi-public public sort of, what would you call it? Public-private organization that supports farmers. And so I was working, doing a lot of watershed education, a lot of work around environmental education. I did like build rain gardens. I learned a lot about gardening. I spent a lot of time outside. I played a ton of sports. I biked everywhere. It was, I think, a really interesting opportunity for me to learn a little bit more about another part of the US and just be in the US, I think, in a very different sense, because I did not grow up in the US. And so going to school and then having this 1 year of AmeriCorps is actually all the time I've really spent in the US, other than a few summers growing up. And then after doing that, so that was about a year, I really wanted to come back to West Africa. And I thought the easiest way to do that would be to come back to Ghana. And so my brother got me in touch with another woman who went to one of the schools that I went to in West Africa, and she gave me the opportunity to come back. And so they paid for me to come back. I had my flights all paid for. I had housing. I had a pretty sweet opportunity where I was paid pretty well, and it was within international development. And it's really through that experience where I was like, number one, I don't think I ever want to work in international development. And I say this, and I have worked on some similar projects, but I think in a very different sense. But that was really my first opportunity to really see what international development was about and really what it entailed. So I did have a father who technically worked within development, but I would still say they have a bit of a different perspective, I think, where my father worked in terms of international development. I was working, more with the Western, I guess, I can't think of a better way to describe it, but more Western ways of thinking about development in some way. And I really didn't like it. I didn't like the way in which people were valued in terms of what their value was. I didn't like this distinction between foreign, local, foreign, hired. I didn't like sort of the resentment that it bred. And it definitely breeds resentment. I mean, people can say whatever they want. In my experience, I saw it firsthand, sort of what happens when you create an environment where you're bringing people from all these different places, but you're telling them because of where they were born or where their passport's from, you can't make as much as this person because they're from this place that's from a different country. I find it very difficult. I don't really understand it. I still don't understand it, but I did benefit from it because I had the passport from the right place, if that makes any sense. And I mean, it's just a system that it just doesn't really resonate with me. I have a lot of friends who still work in that space and, they love it. I think it's great. It works well for them. It doesn't really work well for me and it doesn't resonate well for me. And what I've seen in terms of the results, I also don't think it leads to the results that are sustainable as well. Okay. So my first job back on the continent I was a graduate intern. But because I had the passport as a graduate intern, I was making more money than people who had PhDs. And, for me, I'm just like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm like, what? But, after I worked for one project, then worked on another project. And like I said, I'm grateful that I was able to make what I made, even though it felt very weird. The next project I was supposed to be on wasn't picked back up. Long story short, the way in which the government sort of give out the money, they weren't giving out the money. This point, the US wasn't, they weren't, giving out the money. And so I needed to find something else to do. So I randomly met a recruiter for this company that was building these online platforms, and they wanted to go big. They wanted to go across the entire continent. They had all this money. They were hiring like crazy. And, I couldn't find anything else to do. So when I was offered the opportunity to launch, an online platform specifically for real estate, I thought the guy was crazy. I was like, I don't have a background in real estate. I know nothing about online businesses. I know nothing about doing business in Ghana. Like, I did not grow up in Ghana. Like, what do you mean? But he was like, nah, I think you can do it. And it was the best paying opportunity. So I took it and I ended up staying at that organization for 4 years. And that organization actually is what took me to Nigeria ultimately. And really what led me to become very interested in understanding, what does it take to build a business? What does it take to build a team? How do you bring people along when maybe you look different? Or even if you look the same, you sound different and people think that the things that are coming out of your mouth are like really foreign and weird. And like, who are you? You look like us, but you don't sound like us. Like, what is this? And that's really how I ended up actually being introduced to coaching as a way to build better rapport and also as a way This wasn't something that I thought of at the time when I was introduced to it, and it wasn't something that was shared, but like, it's also through coaching where I learned how to engage, I think, with my emotions in a lot more of an effective manner, learn to sort of self-soothe, learn to sort of deal with conflict, I think, in a much more constructive manner. And I thought I would use that information really to support me in whatever leadership position that I would get. So I never planned to work for myself. I just thought I would always work within these high growth startups. Let me be specific, well-funded high growth startups. I thought that that was the way forward. And, ultimately, after working for, this one company for about 4 years, they sold the platforms I was responsible for, which is kind of cool, but also kind of bad because I had to work myself out of a job and also had to technically fire a lot of people. So I've had the opportunity to sort of start something. Of course, it wasn't my idea. It wasn't my money, but had the opportunity to launch a brand, launch a business that was online, sort of grow it, and then pass it over to competitors. So literally, like we've done, the teams I worked with and the awesome people I worked with, like we did that work where we literally were going to our customers and we're like, look, so we're no longer going to be in existence. These are the guys who are buying our content. They're awesome. Work with them. And I did that in both Ghana and Nigeria. And it was a really, really interesting experience. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. I got a lot of hate. I don't blame anyone for it, but I was definitely not ready for that. And I did all of that before I was 30. So I kind of feel like there's a lot I've been through, a lot I've done within a very short period of time. And then that same company, after I left, ended up being listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So I think that I just had this really interesting, opportunity that I never thought I would take, that I ended up taking, that is just like, I don't know. It's just kind of turned into this crazy thing that I never thought it would. And so now I sort of have a very small, but a very, it's tiny, a very small piece of a company that's now listed on the New York Stock Exchange, which I think is incredible.
Listen to you. It seems you had a lot of opportunities, which
crazy amounts,
many people in Africa, across Africa, do not have.
100%. Yeah.
Okay. Now, see, it's important that we understand how these things happen. Now, yes, you had the opportunity to go to international schools due to the places that your parents worked. Okay. Tell my audience exactly, in your own view, what made these opportunities land on your lap?
Ooh, I mean, that's a real tough one because there's no doubt that I'm privileged. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I think I'm incredibly privileged. I'm very grateful for all the opportunities that have come my way. But I also know some of the people that have had the privilege that I've had or gone to the types of schools that I've gone to wouldn't have taken the opportunities that I've taken. I think a lot of people would have been like, I went to school for X, Y, and Z. I am not doing that job. Okay.
Yes.
When I first started at this company that was doing online businesses, a lot of people had been like, no, if you Googled this company, you'd be like, I would never work for them. And I said that eventually. And then I was like, well, that's pretty good pay. I'm going to take it. And like, if I have to leave, I'll leave. So I do think, though I am incredibly privileged, a part of it also is just being open to opportunities that maybe didn't align with what you thought you saw yourself doing. And then also sometimes, my parents would be like, are you sure? Like that doesn't, we would never do that. So a part of it also is just, it's not necessarily having the confidence, but just recognizing that you can try something. And if it doesn't work out or you don't like it, that's fine. You can move on to something else.
Very good.
And I think that for so many of us, it's very hard to do. And I know with a lot of the clients I work with, it's very much this idea of the first thing I do has to be the only thing I do, or the first job I have has to be the job I have for my entire life. And unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, the world is evolving. And I don't think that's no longer the case. And I think as more of us have access to information and as things are changing within the cities that we work within, it's going to become increasingly important to understand how you show up and what motivates you and when and how you feel productive in order for you to be successful in whatever way you define it, right? Because I don't think we live in a world where you can say any longer, oh, I'm just going to do it just because. I don't think that's going to cut it. I don't think it's going to cut it for a lot of companies. And I think that companies are becoming a little bit more, I don't know the right word to use, a little bit more sophisticated in the things that they expect from their employees. And so I don't think half-assing it, I don't know if that's the right word, but it's not going to be as easy to just do. And a lot of the opportunities or jobs that existed where maybe you can do that no longer will exist in a few years. A lot of those things will be taken up by automation and will be taken up by AI and all these other things. So it's going to become increasingly important to understand what motivates you, what is the value that you can add, and what is unique about you, and being able to communicate that effectively. I think that's very important as well. And that's also something that I work with my clients on.
Very good. Yeah. Very good. So I know you have talked about it a little bit, but make it more concrete. Give us the way you taught that led you to coaching, and what is your ultimate goal in coaching?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I would say the thought was no. I was like, no. I think that if I look back at my career and also a lot of things in my personal life as well, my initial reaction is no, I'm not going to do that. I don't do that. So maybe it's even at the identity level. I don't do that, right? Akua doesn't do this, right? I call myself Cuckoo or Kooks, actually. That's typically how it goes on in my head. Sometimes I even call myself Aqua. Aqua doesn't do that. Like, that's not something I do. And when I find myself saying that's not possible, I can't do that, no, that's when I want to do it. Like, it's so funny because when I look back at my opportunities, like the first company I worked for full-time, when I had the opportunity to build that online platform, I was like, no, I'm not doing that. When they asked me to go to Nigeria, I was like, no, I'm not doing that. When my colleague was like, oh, you should try this coaching thing, maybe it'll help you with, building rapport. I was like, no, why would I do that? I'm fine. Like, I'm good. Have you seen my appraisal results? Like, whatever. So I definitely think that I have, for the most part, a very visceral, and my initial reaction to a lot of things that scare me is no. But then I'm also that crazy human being that's like, if I'm saying no, if I think it's too scary, if I think it's too much of a challenge, I want to try it and see what happens. And that's really it. So when my colleague was like, you should try this out, I know she went through it and she really enjoyed the process. I was like, well, I had the resources, and that's another thing I think that was really amazing about this company I worked for. It gave me the resources also to become the type of coach I wanted to be. I think that there's so many different ways you can get into coaching. You do not need a license. You do not need a certification. You don't need to go through any specific programs. But for me, as someone who is always straddling the line between very traditional sort of education and then like also liking very like weird and esoteric things. And then I also had the resources. So I was like, well, I'm just going to invest in myself. Why not? That's, for some people, that's one way to build competence and confidence. Does it build confidence? No, it actually doesn't build confidence in coaching. I don't think that there's any correlation between the number of certifications you have and how comfortable you feel creating the safe spaces and how comfortable you feel being a coach, and also the value that you provide. There is no correlation. Like, the only way you can be confident as a coach is if you coach. That's it.
Yep.
It's super simple.
That's it.
But I very much, once again, because I just always love learning about these different perspectives and lenses, I was like, I think this would be really an interesting lens for me to be able to try to put on. And so I invested in, in a coaching certification. It wasn't cheap. And I paid for it myself. All my coaching I've paid for myself. Coach training I paid for myself. And this is without actually ever being coached. So I invested in a coach training. I had never had a coach other than, of course, playing sports, right? I played sports my entire life, but had lots of sports coaches, all types. But Yeah, and it's really through that where I was like, oh my gosh, this is too hard. I can't do this. There's no way I can stay present. There's no way I can be mindful. There's no way I can hold the agenda of my client. And once again, this is a very specific type of coaching. This is International Coach Federation standard coaching, which is very different from different forms of coaching. And so that particular type, I was just like, this is too hard. I can't do it. So I have to do it. And that's really it. That's really it. Honestly, I was like, I can't do it. So I have to do it. And went through the training. And by the time I finished it, that's when they had sold my platforms. I was finishing up at that time, also an MBA. And, I was like, well, I'll take a bit of a break and I'll find another opportunity. So I found another job. But at that point, I had worked so much on myself. And when you go through a coaching certification, like, everything that you do with your clients, you've done to yourself. First.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something that's really important to me. That's one of the core pieces to how I show up as a coach. I'm not going to do it with my clients. I'm not going to suggest it to my clients unless I've tried it first. And so going through that coaching program forced me to work so much on myself that I could very quickly be like, that's out of alignment. That's not what we do. Akua doesn't do that. Kook says no. And so I was working at a company where I just didn't feel like I was in integrity. And sometimes, like I said, when I say no, it's like, oh, I have to continue doing this. But in this case, I was seeing other things pop up and I was aware of other things that I was doing. I was self-sabotaging. I was really always tired. I never wanted to do my work. I never created business cards. I don't think I even updated my LinkedIn. Like, I was doing all these things where I was like, yeah, this is not a good space for me. This is not a good place for me. If all of these things outside of me outside of me were like, yeah, no, this isn't good. So I left that opportunity without having a backup and was like, well, I can try and see what it'd be like to start my own business. I've never wanted to start my own business. I like other people's money. I prefer working for other people because I get paid every single month. But you know what? Let's try and see what happens. And that's really what I've been doing for the last 3 years.
Interesting. So coaching in Africa, you say you have clients all over the world. Okay.
Yeah.
What proportion of those clients are in Africa?
That's such a good question. And it's one of those things where, how to put it, there was a point where I was kind of upset about it because I was like, oh, I work here. All of my work experience is on the continent, right? So there's a lot of people who have these preconceived notions because of how I sound that, oh, I must have worked in the US for so long. And I have all these US centric ideas of how to show up. And it's like, no, all of my work experience has been between Ghana and Nigeria. All of my teams have been Ghanaian and Nigerian. I literally have not worked outside of the continent, really. And so I do potentially think that might play into how people think about how, the value I could potentially provide, if that's one of the things that we're looking at. And I know I'm not answering your question, but I feel like I need to give it a bit of context. Okay. So actually right now, I only have 2 clients that are African, 2 clients actually in South Africa right now. Most of my clients do work on the continent. They just might not be African. And I also do have clients in the US as well. So these are one-on-one clients. So in terms of my one-on-one clients, that really is all over the world. So US, I have one who works in Ghana, but she's American. I have one who works in Kenya, but he's actually from the islands. And then I have 2 in South Africa. And it would be nice. I mean, it would be nice to work with more, African clients if that's what sort of comes my way. But once again, when I was building my business, I didn't want to put sort of limits or say that there are certain types of people that I worked with, at least physically. Yeah. I want to focus a little bit more on those pain points. And so I'm very clear about the specific pain points that I work with. And those are, I think, quite universal, right? It doesn't really matter whatever your superficial traits are. I think those are things that leaders deal with anywhere in the world. And at the end of the day, it's my job to really provide a different perspective, right? It's not necessarily to mentor, right? And all of those things, definitely come into play when people are thinking about who they want to invest in. So one part of my work is, of course, that one-on-one work, and the majority of my clients one-on-one are not on the continent, or are on the continent, but not from the continent necessarily. But in terms of the second part of my business, so I also do coaching, group coaching, and then speaking, and then workshops. A lot of that does tend to be on the continent.
Okay.
So it's a bit of both. And so I think it just sort of, the way I see it is that, maybe that one-on-one part, for some people, coaching is a really new thing. You need to be ready and willing to invest in yourself, and also create the time. I think that's also a big thing. Like, do you feel like you have the time to dedicate to it? And so, so maybe I just haven't, found the right people to put my work in front of, my one-on-one work in front of. And, I'm continuing to think about what are other ways to sort of share the work that I can do. And I still can impact people, I think, with the workshops, with my speaking, and then also, of course, with what I share on social media as well. I think all of that's part of the container.
Okay. So what are the most common misconceptions about coaching that your clients, or maybe potential clients, have had, and how have you been able to set them straight?
Yeah, there's so many different ways to sort of answer this question, I think. And I think it's also going to depend on what is your definition of coaching. And so for me, primarily coaching is sort of holding my client's agenda. And so it's not meant to be about my perspective in this case. And so that's a very specific type of coaching. Like I said, there's so many different types of coaching. And even within a coaching session, I'll wear different hats. I'll be like, I can give you the perspective of a consultant. I will give you the perspective from more of a mentor, point of view, like someone who's been there, done that. I can give it to you from a perspective of a different type of coaching. So, because I've had the opportunity to invest in different types of coaching as well. But overall, I would say the biggest misconception that I've heard is that a coach is meant to tell you what to do. And I think that even if you are coming from that consultative or more consulting perspective, no one can tell you what to do. You have to make that decision yourself. A big thing in one particular type of coaching, more of the NLP type. And I'm curious, what type of coaching do you practice? Because you mentioned Tony Robbins. Right. So Tony Robbins does NLP.
I paid Tony Robbins' company to coach me.
Okay, great. Yeah. So he does more of an NLP approach. And so in NLP, they talk about it being at cause, right? So you talk about that formula being at cause versus effect. So this is not, ICF coach. This is a different type of coaching, right?
Yeah.
But just really recognizing that a huge part of being able to shift or change or do something different means that you have to be willing to do something different. You have to be at cause, and you have to recognize that there are things that you can do differently in how you feel towards something or how you show up in order to make a change or achieve whatever you've decided is success. So I would say the biggest misconception is that your coach will tell you what to do. And that, it's just about that conversation, right? And that's why for me, it's so important that people recognize that conversation is a huge part of it, right? The conversation can help to reveal a lot, can help to shape some thoughts on how you can move forward. But at the end of the day, you have to go and implement. That coach can't do it for you. No one can do it for you. Your parents can't do it for you. Your partner can't do it for you. Your investors can't do it for you. You have to do it for yourself, and you have to want it for yourself. And so I would say those are probably the biggest ones. Thinking that it's just about the conversation and not doing that follow-up on yourself, and thinking that the coach is going to tell you what to do.
Yeah. For me, one of the first conversations what I have with my clients is to tell them one thing: I won't do your work for you. Yeah. I won't. Okay. I'm not a motivator. That's not my job. I'm not a therapist.
100%.
Okay. Yeah. You need to motivate yourself. And if you don't motivate yourself, then you won't follow through with the actions you need to do to achieve the goals you want. Now, And then they say, so why am I paying you? You are paying me to listen to you, to guide you here, to ask you questions, for you to start thinking differently. And that's what I do. See, most of the thing I do is just listen to you and ask you a load of questions, and then help you craft strategies and plans to move you forward. And then you need to do the work and then come back to me that way. So that's the primary mode I use. Many people do not achieve their goals. Okay. Mainly because they are not focused. And something I've seen is that most people don't even have goals in the first place.
Yeah.
You know, so how do you help your clients to realign their priorities to make sure they can achieve those goals?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Like when you actually sent that question, I actually wanted to send an email back to be like, it's not about focus. It's not even about not setting the goals. I think, one of the things that's amazing about the world that we're now in is that we are so interconnected. We can see what other people are doing. We can be inspired by so many people.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the fact that we have access and that we can see also means that we spend a lot more time comparing. We spend a lot more time telling ourselves we should do things because XYZ has done it, or my parents have done it, or this person says I should do it. This person I looked up to does X, Y, and Z. Or once again, we can go to the identity level. This is what X, whatever, identity you want to put
my group is doing.
Exactly. So that's really the problem I see with goal setting, right? The problem is that we aren't actually setting goals that align with us. We haven't taken the time. We haven't created the space. We haven't honored ourselves enough to really reflect on, and this is the word I use. Like I said, everyone uses different words, but really to reflect on what does success look like for us? And that answer is going to look different for every single person. So I think the first problem is just that we are not honoring ourselves as individuals. That's really it. We need to honor ourselves as individuals first. And I think everything else will be so much easier. And that's why I really love my work, because I'm able to create that safe space where people can honor themselves, where it doesn't seem selfish for them to talk about what they get excited about, right? Because if you're in certain spaces, people might make fun of you. They might call you out. They might say, hey, you, based on your skin color, how dare you think that? Who are you to want that, right? There's so many things that happens when we are sharing what's important to us and what our goals are.
Yeah.
So I think the first step really is just honoring yourself as an individual and cultivating your own self-awareness around, what do I want to do? And recognizing that might change. That's another thing as well. Right? Giving ourselves that grace, that self-compassion, that it can change. And that's fine. What you wanted at 15 years old may not be what you want at 30 years old.
Absolutely.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's absolutely fine. And if it's still the same, still take the time and space and energy to reflect on whether or not it really resonates, or whether or not you're just sticking to it because that's easy, right? Whether or not you're just sticking to that because you're afraid of anything else. Whether or not you're just doing it because someone that you think is amazing is doing it and it looks like it works. So it's just really about, once again, I think honoring yourself as an individual, where you'll start to really recognize, what is it that I really want? And I think for some people, the idea or the word goal is too much. So it also might be, let's think about how else we can talk about the things that we want. It can be as simple as, I want this.
Yes.
That might resonate better with some people. This is my target. Maybe if you're a little bit more left brain, a little bit more quantitative, these are my KPIs. So change the word. Use a word that resonates with you. Use a word that brings you joy, lights you up, gets you excited, but really just recognize that taking the time to think about what's next or what success looks like or whatever world you want will make it easier for you to actually get there, right? So we can also get to the point where there's a lot of really interesting research out there around goal setting. One of the reasons why a lot of people don't achieve their goals, right? Research says because they don't even set them, right? So once you've taken the time to cultivate your self-awareness, really recognize what's important to you, what's not, now take that time to decide what does success look like, what's my goal, what's my target, and do that every so often, right? Another key thing here, and this is a comparison thing, right? This is based on people reading what's happening, right? And seeing what other people are doing. You do not need a 10-year goal. You do not need a 50-year goal, right? I think so many of us, and I say this with many of my clients, get upset because they're like, well, I don't know where I want to be in 1 year. I don't have a 5-year plan. That's okay. Not everyone is necessarily built or designed or was evolved to be able to think that far ahead. So it's fine if you just want to know or spend some time thinking about what tomorrow looks like, because for some people, and also we can think about this in terms of some businesses, that's enough, right? When you work within a fast growing startup, you should not be thinking about where you're going in a month from now.
Okay.
My KPIs changed every single week. We were iterating so quickly. Every single week, our KPIs were different. I'm not suggesting that that should work for you if you're working within a high growth startup. Like, it's really going to look different for everybody, but just really recognizing that there is no one size fits all, right? We all, I think, could do with a bit more nuance. We all could do with just a bit more of respecting and creating space for and honoring our individual differences. And I think that's what's going to shift a lot of people's relationships with goal setting, a lot of people's relationships. So I do a lot of work with time management and productivity, and that's really what's going to shift your relationship with a lot of those things. Recognizing that what works for somebody else may not work for you. Just telling yourself that story can be incredibly empowering, can release you from so many things, potentially.
Interesting. Now, it seems most of your client base are business, right? Are business people. I tend
to work with a lot of people who work within businesses, right? Yeah.
Good.
So the majority are founders, and then I have a few who are sort of like VPs or like upper management level within larger corporations.
Interesting. See, if you work a lot with individuals dealing with individual issues, relationships, career issues, then they actually need a longer term goals. Okay. Otherwise, they would not be able to achieve them. In terms of a person, like you said, you might recognize a certain goal which you want, but if the environment changes, you need to change that goal, okay? Because once the initial environment changes, keeping to that initial goal will only frustrate you. Okay.
Can we get more specific? Because I think everything is context specific.
Okay.
I mean, I agree with you. There are some situations where you do need longer term goals, but you always are working backwards, right? So if we set something 5 years from now, that's great. But then we need to think about what do we do now in order to get closer to that?
Of course. You have
so
a long-term goal, a 5-year goal. Okay. Yeah. That's your let's say that's your ultimate in 5 years. Okay. Yeah. Then you need to break it down to your actions, your immediate actions to moving forward. Okay. You have a 5-year plan. Okay. That's where you're going, but you need to have little bits, activities which you need to do on a consistent basis to drive you towards reaching that longer term goal. Okay. So if something in the middle changes, you need to change your, basically, mostly you need to change your strategy, okay? Because something on the road has changed. You have a roadblock which doesn't allow you to drive through the way you initially thought you get to the goal. You need to change it. So that's the for personal. Let's say, I talk to a lot of ladies who want to be married, for example.
Fair.
Although I tell them I don't really.
Is that what they really want? Right. So for me, the first question is, what is it that you really want? Because
Yes.
everyone's marriage looks different. Do you want partnership? Do you want, I think there's so much more, right, that's underlying that. Because is it simply just the fact that you have, the pictures? You can find anyone to take engagement pictures with, right? So there's a lot more there.
Yeah, that's the truth. So I tend to go through the motion, ask them very a lot of questions to help them to define exactly what they want.
Yes.
Okay? Because what one person actually wants is very different from what the other person wants. So we need to go through the motion to define every step of what they want. Okay, before we now say, okay, you want this, then we need to do this and that and that and that and that. Once we finish this process, we can now start making plans.
Yeah.
Okay. So along the way, if something changes, if something what's the word now? What's the word?
Shifts.
No, God, I lose this. This is part of my issue. I lose God, I can't even find the word. Anyway, I'm talking about if something concrete in part of the goal changes, then we need to redefine that part of the goal.
Definitely, yes.
Mainly the strategy to get there.
Fair, yeah.
So all those things are interesting. You see, the most interesting thing about coaching for me is that every client is different. So I get to do everything in the book. I talk to people, I learn. See, my work as a coach, I've gained a lot from it, more than my clients. I've gained much more than any of my clients because I talk to different people, and that's something I really, really love. And well, for me, I'm nearly 50, so my work today is the same thing I would do in the next 10, 20 years, because it's always changing, and like I told you, I'm not just a coach, I'm more of an educator. So my work is not just listening to people and telling them what to do. I don't actually tell people what to do. I guide them by asking a lot of questions. Yes, one thing about coaching and helping people achieve goals is why they want something. Like we just talked about. So how do you, when people don't articulate their why of why they want something, they are most likely never going to achieve it. Okay. So how do you help your clients to articulate their reasons for something?
Yeah. So to sort of start off, and I'm actually going to be doing this after this call.
Okay.
I do something that I call a discovery session where there's really, how to put it, whatever they want to get out of the coaching is not, that's not on the agenda, right?
Okay.
Discovery call is really just by, just all about going through what are your values? What is your mission? What is your vision? Who are the important people in your life? What are the important things that you think you need to do? It is just pretty much just a brain dump of all these different things. And we spend about 90 minutes doing this. And for me, I think it's a really great starting point, because what ends up happening is when they sign up for me or apply to work with me, we'll compare, like, okay, this is what you put when you applied to work with me, and this is all that's coming through in your discovery call. Are they overlapping, right? Are there changes here? Are your thoughts around where you want to focus?
Yeah.
Have they changed? So that's one of the ways I do it. So the first thing is by having a conversation that really has no boundaries.
No format.
It's very much a
Yeah.
brain dump where you're just thinking through anything. And so stuff will just start coming through. They'll just start saying things and things will just come up. And then we also can record the conversation so they can go back and listen to it and also see visually, where did they light up? When were they excited?
Yeah.
When did they recognize, like, oh, I'm holding back, right? There might be something there. So that's one, I think, really great way to help support yourself or your clients with trying to figure out what is really important. And I think sometimes actually what comes out first might be very different from what initially they thought also would be important, right? So that as well. So starting to just compare some of the things that they're saying, the language that they use. So starting to point that out can also be very helpful for my clients as well. And then recently I've taken it really to the next level. So I've started looking into other ways to provide information to my clients. So I'm leveraging an additional system that uses different parts of the body as sort of intelligence to what might be going on. And I think that that's also a really interesting and unique way to get a different perspective and provide your clients a different perspective of what else might be going on and where their thoughts might be as well. So also using some outside tools, outside assessments, especially when they're assessments where they're not actually taking it as a test, I think can be very interesting. So seeing how they really respond or react or what comes up when I share some of this information, I think has also been very helpful and also gives them, most importantly, the vocabulary, because that's really what's missing at the end of the day. And when I think back to how coaching has supported me, I think it's just given me the vocabulary to talk about things that I've always felt, right? To talk about things that have always happened within me and in my head, but I didn't know how to communicate it. So there's also, that's also a big part, I think, of coaching, giving our clients the vocabulary, in addition to the confidence and the competence to talk about their why and to do it in a way where they're able to inspire others or influence others if they're in leadership positions.
Good. I will tell you, coaching, like I told you, I did a lot of coaching, especially when I wasn't able to speak. See, oh man, I did a lot of work, and that helped me to be able to start articulating my thoughts. At the time, even to just think about something was the hardest thing for me. To think about it was the hardest thing for me. But once I started using coaching sessions, it lifted my spirit and my thought pattern to start thinking. And fortunately, that was when WhatsApp first came on. So I was able to start typing my thoughts. You know, I had a tablet and I had a phone. So I had one a WhatsApp whatever on my phone and have one on my tablet. So I type and I sent back and forth, So it helped me a lot to start thinking through things and writing them down, Yeah, that was one of the most helpful tools I had in my journey to recover my communication abilities. Yes. How do you think coaching would contribute to Africa's development?
This is a question. I think what I really appreciate about coaching is that it really provides, once again, that safe space to think about things from different perspectives. And I think if anyone wants to succeed, I mean, when we talk about Africa, I mean, Africa is massive, right? And I think, I don't know, I was thinking about this question last night, and I was like, I think one of the things that would be very helpful for us is actually to think of ourselves more as individuals a bit more. If we actually thought of ourselves a little bit more as individuals who had agency and were at cause, at the larger scale, we might have very different results. Okay. And for me, I think with the right support, people will be able to see that there is a different way, that there are other options. Because I think for so many people, and this is a really massive generalization, and I hate to generalize, but I think for a lot of people, they think there is no other option.
Way. Yeah.
There's no other way. There's some level of potentially apathy or hopelessness. And I think that this is something I've seen at all levels, right? And I'm not trying to necessarily make a class level or a classist sort of argument, but just really recognizing that I think across the board, so many people think that it's not possible, nothing can be done better, there's no hope. And I think that's really unfortunate. And I think that coaching might be a unique tool that can be leveraged to support people in seeing that there are other ways, other options, other perspectives that might be more helpful to move us all forward at the end of the day. And I think that if each individual is empowered to be able to move forward in a different way, once again, that helps the collective. Because I think way too often we use, and I even in my workshops, I'll hear people say things like, well, that's how it works in Africa, or this is what happens in Kenya. And sometimes I will call out that language and just be like, well, can you find a counterexample to that? Can you name one time when that wasn't true? And it's just those small little tweaks in someone's thinking that can actually help inspire an idea that really might change not just their lives, but other people's lives.
Yeah.
And so back to this idea, honestly, of honoring the individual, I don't know why it keeps coming up, but I really think that it's really through seeing that you yourself can make a difference where a difference really can be made. Yeah. And that your approach to something can be different from somebody else's. It doesn't I think I hear a lot, this is how it's done here. And I get this a lot also because of my accent. So people make this assumption, which I think is hilarious, of what I know and what I don't know. And it's fine, but it's just like that approach, that thought, that language you're using, what you're trying to communicate isn't helping anyone. It's not even helping you. It's keeping you stuck. And it's only furthering, for the lack of a better word, your suffering or whatever's happening or the issue or the challenge. Like trying to show that you are different or that I am somehow different and if I'm having a conversation with you doesn't lead to anything. It's like, okay, and then, and so I don't understand, you know what I mean? Does that make you happy? Is it serving you? I think there's so many different ways to look at it, but I really think that coaching can help us see that there's more, I think, to just some of these broad labels that we give ourselves. Yeah. And I think there's some really interesting conversations actually happening right now, even in the US, about should we even be calling ourselves? This is more of an American-based thing, but we could ask in the US, should we really be calling ourselves a minority? Is that empowering to call ourselves a minority, right? So we can take that sort of that same thought process to hear, is it really empowering to talk about ourselves as just Africans? What would actually help us get to the next level? Thinking of ourselves
I'm smiling because
I don't know. I'm not saying it'll necessarily work, but I think it's just an interesting thing to sort of investigate and sort of think about. Would we get more done if we thought about ourselves more from a country or even more specific than that level? I don't know. I know our borders are just pretty much made up, right? I know those have very little to do with the people in the countries, but would it be helpful? I don't know, but I think it's worth trying. And I think that we need to be open to trying different ways and different approaches rather than just saying blanketly, oh, it's not going to work, or things don't happen that way, or it's tradition. I always love to push back on that. Whose tradition? How long have we been in, quote unquote control? A lot of these institutions aren't that old. A lot of these institutions were not, created by a lot of the people who are now, quote unquote, in power. So what are we really saying here when we're using some of these words and some of this language to sort of not allow ourselves to move forward or not allow ourselves to evolve or get to the next level?
These issues are things I've debated many times on social media with a lot of people across the continent, as well as in my extended family forum on WhatsApp. We, in fact, I don't want to talk about what we debate, but these issues are, like you said, holding on to many of these issues do not allow us to move forward, because we just say, this is how it's done. It's culture, it's tradition. And we don't ask ourselves, is this culture, this tradition, or this way of doing things, has it helped us?
100%. And who is it helping? What incentives are there in place for this to continue? Who is honestly getting rich off of this? Who is continuing to get access to certain resources based on this system that we've said is tradition or cultural? I think all of these questions are just...
I tell people, we must be ready to ask questions and answer questions. Otherwise, we would not move forward,
Definitely.
So,
and someone benefits, right? There are benefits. There are people who are benefiting from the fact that we can't move forward as well. Yeah. So I think that's an interesting sort of thing to think and reflect on as well.
Yeah, very good. So let me ask you my last question. This is usually my last question. What is your vision of Africa in 20, 30 years' time? How do you see Africa in your mind's eye? So don't tell me what you see based on data. I'm asking you to tell me what you see in your mind's eye in 30 years, 20 years, 30 years time.
Such a question. Such a question. Honestly, the first thing that comes to mind is I see an Africa where each person is very much proud of who they are, what they look like, and they're excited to share their perspective and their ideas. They don't feel like they need to outsource their thoughts, their morality, what gets them excited, what their vision of success is. I think for me, that would be incredibly exciting. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what really comes for me. And if I'm thinking about what that looks like, so the first thing that happened is actually a flash of an image. And I mean, I think for some people, this might sound really silly, but it's people embracing what they've been given. So I see people with, their hair and loving their hair and the way their hair looks, people loving what they can actually create where they live and wearing that proudly. And the types of buildings that we're in really respond to the environment that we're in and use materials based on the environment that we're in, as opposed to importing something or being told that this is what works elsewhere, so you should do it here.
Yeah.
So it's very much about, I don't think the word is reclaiming, but very much around using what we have and being proud of what we have and being the ones to show the world that, hey, look, this is what we can use. And as opposed to sort of the opposite, where it's the world using it. And so we then once again want to reclaim. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's sort of what sort of comes to mind, and that, and sort of the way I see it.
Good. Akua, thank you very much for being a guest of Think Big for Africa. And I will like to keep in touch with you and to do something together very soon.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope my ideas weren't too scary.
No.
Where it goes here. But, I think at the end of the day, it's just really, really about just giving yourself that opportunity to think for yourself.
Yes.
And that's what I love to do. And I even have a course all about really just rethinking some of those initial thoughts that you have and thinking about whether or not they serve you. And I think so many of us, me included, still, even though this is my work, have thoughts that don't necessarily serve us. And ultimately, that means my results and whatever behaviors probably won't serve me either.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Listen or watch more episodes of Think Big for Africa podcast with new guests every week. Subscribe to ensure that you are notified whenever new episodes are available.